Welcome to Encouragement for Living Life with Lockwood and Lockwood. The guys are here to encourage you in your attempt to live more confidently and successfully in our world. They are highly trained and experienced mental health professionals, but they are not your mental health professional. They are sharing encouragement through information and discussion. People are complex. Just because an idea helps one person doesn't mean it will help someone else. You need to consult with your own professional who will hopefully know what is best for you in your situation. Now, it's time for Lockwood and Lockwood.
And the title is Mental Health with God and Without God. Now, I started this out with, we're not going to debate the reality of presence of God or lack of God, because that's kind of a ridiculous thing and goes nowhere. And God is foolishness to people who do not believe. So we're just going to leave that part alone and just go on the fact that I have a different experience than you. You know what I'm saying? And you have a different way of looking at life than I have. And
Sure.
so we want to look at both ways for people and the benefits and maybe the weaknesses of either one, too, for people.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. Now, the first thing I started with for people listening, is truth. No matter whether you believe in God or not, truth is truth. 1 + 1 does equal 2. Electricity can light lights and it can kill you if you get in touch with it the wrong way. So all truth, I believe, comes from God, but truth still is truth whether you believe in God or not. And so truth's really important to me in terms of people healing and changing in terms of different kind of issues, alcohol and drug issues, mental health issues, etc. The things that work, and not necessarily for everyone all the time, but principles that work are still true. So like example, good listening. That's a principle that if you have good listening, you're more likely to help somebody if you know how to listen to them.
Sure.
That kind of thing. So there's a lot that I'm saying that we can agree on. That's true for all people coming in for different kinds of treatment from different kinds of issues. So no matter whether you believe or don't believe, in one sense, it doesn't matter because good treatment still is going to be good treatment. Because the principles behind it are going to be solid and good. And treatment that doesn't work is usually not going to work, and because the principles are not good behind it, it doesn't work. Like poor listening, not understanding who's telling you what in front of you, which means it's hard to help them, things like that. So I went down to the next thing is it like what principles in mental health are true? What are some common principles that we can tell people about that are true in terms of mental health and treatment?
There's so much to say because I think it's a question of like, what is the particular issue that we're trying to help people with, right? Because one of my good colleagues, who's a psychologist from Ohio, where your family's from, he always says we don't treat problems, we treat people, right?
Right.
And so, clinicians are trying to help people with complicated circumstances and dynamics. And so it's very tempting to get focused, I would say, on just, you have a substance use disorder. It's this narrowly defined thing in a box. But in reality, that's not what we do. That's not what you do. That's not what I do, even though we do very different kinds of work. So really what we try to do is we look at the layers of a person and see where those different layers can shift. That's one thing that we do. So I would say one general principle is not, let's say, problem-focused thinking, because problem-focused thinking is helpful in some limited circumstances for some people.
Right.
But I would say that most of the time when people come to treatment centers or just see their therapist once a week, they don't just want to address a problem. Because like you and I are both smart enough to be able to fix a problem pretty quickly. Like most quote unquote problems that people come in with, we could easily fix in less than an hour probably. Because the problems themselves aren't super complicated. Your wife is pissed at you? Okay, no problem. How are you talking to her? Maybe don't be so condescending to your wife. You know what I mean? Like, if you're condescending to your wife, guess what's going to happen, right? Like, problem solved, just like that. So the issue is not, like the issue is not problem identification, problem solving from what I can tell. When it comes to mental health, really it's, looking at the complexity of a person is one thing that quality providers do. I think another thing that quality providers do is try to understand, as you said, from a principled perspective, what people's values are and how their behavior aligns with it, whether that's from a religious perspective or from a philosophical perspective or whatever. It doesn't really matter because it's the same conversation no matter what lens you use. So I think quality providers try to help people understand how their behavior actually aligns with their values or not, whether it's on a short-term basis
Okay.
or a long-term basis. So I think those are two things that are true. I think a third thing that is true is, quality mental health providers are typically trying to help you feel more empowered over time. I don't
Yeah.
know if
Yeah.
I don't know that that's necessarily a direct consequence in some cases and some types of therapy, but I think for other types of therapy, helping people feel empowered is directly on the menu and something we're directly trying to help people do. So I
Yeah.
think developing a sense of agency or power, whatever words you like, I think is a third thing. And I think a fourth thing that I see that I definitely teach my grad students, my doctoral students, and my master's students is I want people to feel not just more empowered, but I want them to be more aware of their process, right? So I want them to have, you could call it insight if you want, or awareness. The word doesn't matter to me. I think it's just, I want you to understand your process, whatever it is, whether it's adaptive or maladaptive, whether it's serving you or not, because like in the old school sense of things, there's defense mechanisms, right? Defense mechanisms are not universally bad. They're both good and bad. And so the
Right.
question is,
Right.
in what ways do these defense mechanisms serve you? And then in what ways don't they? Right. So I would call that either awareness or insight. So I think that's a fourth thing that most quality therapists are trying to do.
Nice. Okay. I agree. I don't find any problem with any of those at all.
Yeah.
I think they're
Yeah.
all important stuff. I think it doesn't matter what type of mental health training you have. I
Yeah.
think if you focus on the person, I like the first one. It's a person, not a problem. Not that
Yeah.
problems don't get addressed, but the whole person, and that's really important. And yeah, okay. So I get again, those are to me truths or principles that are important whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God.
Yeah.
That they help. When you get to know the person in front of you, you get to know their defenses, what works, what doesn't work, what's maladaptive, things like that. Yeah, because you want to try and help people move from the position they're in when they come in to see you with what their presenting problem is or problems are, whatever the case may be, to
Yeah.
a different position where they have more. And I like empowerment too, obviously, that they have more ability to affect change in their life,
Yeah.
emotionally, psychologically, relationally,
Yeah.
etc. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I don't know why. Let me see. I don't know why, but I don't know if I was talking out loud and my phone was listening to me as it always does. You know what I'm saying? No, I took the wrong sheet off here. Anyway, it was really funny. It's like all of a sudden I started getting these things on YouTube, near-death experiences and after-death experiences. So
Mm.
I listened to this one guy. He's just your typical guy, right?
Mm.
And this isn't related so much to, anyway, it was real interesting. This is some dude, who almost died from some kind of illness that required surgery. It's pretty bad, apparently. His doctor said later he was praying because he didn't see people recover. He'd done surgery with people on a lot of these, but none of them ever survived. And he
Yeah.
survived. And while he
Mm.
was technically dead, they finally shocked him and revived him, and he came back. He talked about going to heaven,
Mm.
and spending time holding Jesus' hand and looking at heaven and seeing heaven. And later on, he recounted that decades before, he had asked God as a child to both show him heaven and show him his glory. And he was in heaven, he saw the spear that was sending out these things, and one of them hit him and made him feel, of course, good and whatever and awe, and he fell to his knees. And then they shocked him, he came back. Now, what's really crazy, and people who believe like me, really crazy, have no problem believing this guy's story because he's just some guy. He's not a radical, weird any way, just some down to earth guy. Grew up, I guess, Catholic. He would tell you he was not religious. He was not involved much other than showing up at church. You know, he didn't want to be a follower of Jesus. You know, so when he finally came to after his surgery, he got pneumonia, which is not good when you have such a serious problem that he had anyway. And Jesus then showed up and spent 3 hours with him. A nurse was sitting with him because they just had packed him in ice. But then Jesus showed up at the end of the bed, and it was really interesting. He could talk to Jesus, and the nurse had no idea they were talking to each other. And then he could talk to the nurse, and she would be aware he's talking to her. And then he'd go back and be talking to Jesus. Anyway, it was really interesting. But anyway, one more example of healing, and I'll get to mental health in a minute. But Joel Osteen, a pastor, a well-known pastor, you know of him. His mom was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. You know, decades and decades before she died, had a matter of weeks to live, and just started quoting scriptures, putting them all over the house, and just quoting scripture all the time. And she ended up living decades later. You know, she was healed of her liver cancer. Alan Jackson, a pastor in Tennessee, whose mom recently died actually, was diagnosed with terminal cancer, went to the Mayo Clinic and brought all the records, because they have you bring all your records with you, and then they do their own testing of you too. And they were getting ready to go, just make yourself comfortable. And the doctor came in and said, look, I got to tell you something. You have no cancer. And they sent her home. And the doctor just said, look, go and be a mom and enjoy your family. And she lived for decades later, too. See, I have no problem believing things like this. And there's one other one that stands out to me, too. You know Joyce Meyer. You know I appreciate Joyce Meyer for a number of different reasons. I call myself the one-on-one Joyce Meyer sometimes. Not big at speaking to large groups, but anyway, this old farmer brought his wife to one of her conferences, and this guy had nothing to do with God, you know, but he was trying to be a nice guy, so he drove his wife like country people would do. I'm going to drive my wife to the conference, and I'll sit there with her patiently, even though I don't like this stuff. And he's there watching her, and all of a sudden she's surrounded by about 8 men in white with swords. And he's like freaking out, like, what the hell is this? And he looks at his wife and he says, what are all these men doing with swords around Joyce Meyer? And his wife says, there are no men with swords around Joyce Meyer. Well, he saw 8 angels with swords protecting her. But he's the only one that saw them. And the guy's not crazy, just some down-to-earth old-time farm guy. See, I hear stories like that. I believe them. Now for a more personal thing with healing. You know, I had a spiritual experience with God when I was in my master's program, and I was drinking. I was miserable. And I don't even remember asking for help. That's what's so freaky. I wish I could tell you I did. I don't know, maybe I did. But I was in my bedroom one more depressed night, you know, having drunk some and just depressed. And all of a sudden I had a peace come over me that was astounding, because I had never had peace in my whole life. Never had peace. You know, the whole room was as still as could be. There was no white light, you know, but there was a tremendous peace that just overtook me. And I slept better than I'd ever slept in my life. And then the presence of God, I believe, showed up in my room. Again, don't think I asked for it. But I can tell you this, I've been flirting with talking to Satan before that. I don't know if I ever told you that part. I was just looking for something, you know, because I was so freaking miserable, you know, and he showed up. And anyway, it didn't change everything, but it gave me a start on believing in God that I could never do before. I kind of believed in God, but I hated God. Thought he was impotent and just left people to be hurt and neglected and abused, which ended up being my story. And anyway, and then I have patients that have had white light experiences, the compulsion to drink taken away from them immediately. People with severe trauma, that just isn't going to happen psychologically too, particularly with the massive amount of defenses that they have, that something just reached right through it and took away the compulsion to drink.
Yeah.
started their recovery or kept their. I had one patient probably had 20 spiritual encounters with God, and we now know through his work with me, it's because he could not trust a human being in his life, and
Mm.
he can't trust God just by knowing that there's a God. So
Mm.
God kept reassuring him through experiences that he's there and he's real. And I've had many experiences like this, and people in meetings have talked about this forever in AA meetings. So when I hear spiritual stories, some people don't believe, think they're kind of, there's other explanations, of course, for the stories. And I hear them, I just go, well, man, it's God showing up. So to me, with mental health, I believe God shows up. The alcoholic is an example. I haven't seen God take away completely an anxiety problem. I haven't seen him remove trauma from a person's life. I've seen him remove the compulsion to drink and drug. With people who have an extreme compulsion to drink or drug that they are like trains going down the side of a mountain without brakes. I've seen that happen, but I haven't, from at least my experience, seen people that were healed of anxiety, depression just went away. You know what I'm saying? But I think people have had resources because of their belief in God that other people don't have. They lead you to the right people, the right resources. He helps you when times are tough. Like I say, when I feel close to God, I have peace, and it doesn't matter what's going on. I know I'm okay because I'm in His presence, and He created everything, and He's in charge of it. So if He's got me, I'm okay. If I can stay there, and it's hard to stay there.
Yeah.
But I believe that's the difference between all the things we can talk about that are good treatment. That there's an X factor that if you believe in God, that you have a power available to you that you don't have through the work of good therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, etc. And most of the people who dealt with alcoholics in the old days, when they would accept any kind of help for an alcoholic because no one could heal them.
Right.
Very few people ever got sober
Yeah.
until Bill Wilson had a spiritual experience. And after talking with drinking while his friend Ebby talked about his spiritual experience. Anyway, so that's, for people that do believe, it's common that, and I want them to rely on that and want them to be as close to God as they can be and pray for healing because God does heal. You hear more about dramatic healings with physical problems than you do with mental health problems, other than the compulsion to drink being taken away or drug being taken away. At least in my experience. And maybe someone's had their anxiety removed, their depression removed. I don't know. I haven't seen that with my patients, but I've seen them because of God grow a lot in people who might never have grown or recovered to the extent that they have. I believe the power and presence of God working through me has done what I could not do alone with good technique.
Mm.
That's kind of my story and my experience with people who are, as you have said recently, are extremely damaged people, extremely hurt people,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's my
Yeah.
pitch for believing, because there's something added to the mix that a human being can't add, and I just trust God's ways and man's ways. I've tried man's ways before, I believe, and my ways didn't work real well, and his ways do work well and make for a better life. So that's my pitch for that. But I know people can get better without that. I know that,
Yeah.
being in the right place, the right therapist. That's why I say never give up. Keep looking for people. Keep looking for, if you really work with someone and you haven't gotten anywhere, it's been a while, try someone else. That's why I say things like that, because there are solutions out there, and, there's help available that does help people. But I wanted to make a pitch for the difference between the two. And Menninger's in the old days, was God-based, and Wichita, Kansas, and they were real big on the integration of God, and there's a lot of treatment like that. It still exists in the United States, but it's certainly a small minority, I think, compared to mainline treatment, types of treatment. I think recovery is probably one of the fields where you can talk about God most freely because of AA's impact on the culture, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
too. So just wanted to to share that with people. If you haven't tried it, it is a power that you don't have. Human beings, I've come to realize, we're limited. At least I know I am in my ability to help people, and I think I'm pretty okay with what I do, but we're all limited.
Yeah, I think, just to add something to this,
Yeah.
for people that are not interested in spirituality or religion, I think one perspective that I find helpful, that a number of people I work with have find helpful, um, is, you know, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, necessarily what you believe, because I think one of the big problems that many people face, regardless of their religious belief systems, is they have a lot of arrogance about what they can control and influence. And so,
Yep.
and I think that there are plenty of religious people that who are extremely arrogant and play God on a regular basis, despite the fact that they say they believe in God and things like that.
Hey,
So
can we stop
I
a
think,
second here? My son, this gentleman over here, who you're listening to, he's a truth teller. So I remember him confronting one of the pastors in our church.
I tell
You want to tell that story?
I tell this story at least once a quarter because because it speaks to this problem I'm speaking of,
I
right?
know. I
So
know.
just to finish the thought, and I'll tell the
Oh, go
story.
ahead.
So
Go ahead.
the point I'm trying to make is I think that there's a really strong case for some degree of humility and believing there's greater order outside of yourself, whether you call it God or whatever. That's my pitch, because when we don't think of ourselves as the ultimate influencer of our life, things usually get better because there's a lot of stuff that we can't control and influence, and we just don't realize it. So that's the secular pitch for thinking about something like God. But so back to the story. So I believe I have a unique experience in life in one particular way,
Yeah.
which is I grew up in probably one of the best churches you could grow up in, whether or not you
Mm.
believe in God or not. I think I just had some existential luck growing up with a pastor like Dr. Richard Adams back when he was alive. Just a nice guy, just a good guy who cared, who believed, who treated people and lived the principles.
Yeah.
He was just
Yeah.
a good guy,
Yeah.
And I mean, I think anyone, if you're an atheist, you would have loved sitting in the pews with us at the time because he's just a good guy. He's just a nice guy. He actually cared. He wasn't full of shit. It wasn't ego. And like, he's a good guy. So contrast that experience I had growing up to like, I'm in college, right? I come back from my first year of college, I think it was. I was 19 or 18 or something.
Yeah.
And there's this new guy, I won't say his name, but he was the replacement pastor after Dr. Adams died. And he's not a bad guy, but I distinctly recall this guy being up at the pulpit and just like fire and brimstone. He's so fearful and so angry that you don't even have to have a bachelor's degree in psychology to understand just how fearful and angry he is. You know, like I've heard a lot of fire and brimstone sermons before in my life and stuff like that, but this dude seemed unusually upset and worried on behalf of the congregation, but not about himself. Interestingly, it's always interesting when pastors get up on stage and they talk about other people and they never reference themselves as if they're not part of the flock, so to speak. That discrepancy is one that everyone should check out, whether you're religious or not. The second thing that was like super super telling was, so there's the anger and the fear that a blind deaf person could hear and see. Then there's the discrepancy between not talking about himself ever and being part of the community. That was the second thing. And the third thing I noticed was it never changed. There was never a break. There was never like a breath. There was never a sermon where everything was like maybe a little better, a little optimistic, grace, something. whatever. He was just like always in fear
Yeah.
and always talking about problems, which is
Yeah.
so fascinating, you know? So, anyways, I think it was maybe a month into being back on summer break or something. I'm sitting in church with you that day, not really much of a believer at the time. And but I just remember sitting next to you going, what is going on here? I think I should go talk to him, because I felt bad. I genuinely felt bad for the guy, you know. I so, the sermon finishes or whatever. He goes back to his office. I've been back there a few times. So I walk back there for whatever reason, I don't know. I felt moved to walk back there.
You
And
did. You did.
I walked right up to I knocked on his door. I walked in and said, "Hey, can I have a conversation with you?" And he said, "Sure, what's going on?" And, he knew my name at the time because I've been coming for a couple of weeks now. And he said, "What's on your mind, son?" And I said, "Are you okay?" I just started with, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yes, of course. Why?" And I said, "Well, you seem really angry and afraid." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I've been paying attention for a while now, and a lot of your sermons seem to be full of like a lot of fear and anger, not much love or hope or whatever." And this is a more complicated set of things that I said, but that's the gist of it. And he looked at me and he said the damnedest thing, which is what patients do all the time. He's like, "I'm just really impassioned. I just have a lot of passion." And I said, "Okay, fair enough. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything?" I'm what, 19, asking this mid 30s, 40-year-old guy if he needs anything, if he's okay. Anyways, so trying to fix your dad, right? So he's like, "No, I'm okay. Thank you for sharing your concerns," or whatever. And then what is it, like 6 months later or something? It comes out he's like
Or
struggling
less.
with booze. Yeah, he comes out with like a booze problem and a marital problem, and I think he leaves the faith altogether and goes back to being like a line worker or something. Yeah, and it's just like, to me, that I think is a common problem. There's a hubris, there's an ego that people have in and outside of faith circles, which is,
Yeah.
I see a problem and I'm gonna like fix it, right? Or I'm in control of the universe enough that I can scream at you and figure something out. Or I'm appropriately aware of something and you should listen to me. And all of that is hubris, right? To me, all that's ego,
Right. Right.
because you don't trust that there's a greater order outside of yourself. It's like, if you're an atheist and you're listening, and I relate, it's like, if you really think that you're going to make the stoplights work by yourself, good luck with that. Come to Los Angeles, see what it's like to make the stoplights work with like thousands and thousands of cars on the road any given day. I don't think you could do that, let alone anything else, by yourself. So there's some cosmic order you're not aware of and you're not willing to at least admit to, even if you just, think physics is real, right? So like, for
I
me,
had a yeah.
I have a problem with ego and hubris when it comes to this topic, both in the religious world and in the non-religious world, which is why I think some degree of thinking about the greater order outside of yourself is super useful. It helps you be humble and not have to care so much.
There was an alcoholism counselor in a treatment program I trained in many moons ago,
Yeah.
And he said, if you don't believe in higher powers, I dare you to go out there in that intersection outside the hospital here, take all your clothes off, and just stand there. And I think within 15 minutes, you'll encounter some higher powers. They'll be called policemen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they will exert power over you.
Yeah. So the concept does
The
not
order to
have to be
things.
religious. Yeah, if there's a greater order outside of yourself, that's how we got here. If you're the most strict evolutionist, that's literally how we got here. Hundreds of generations of people died to get you here. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah,
just me.
I don't remember what consequences that pastor had, but I knew that eventually he disappeared fairly quickly from being a pastor, and that was probably good
Yeah.
for him, to go do
Yeah.
something else. Interestingly enough, the next one that I don't think you knew, who came in to try and fill that, they call it fill the pulpit, he admitted that he had a problem with alcoholism
Hmm.
and women. And unfortunately, he had no recovery program, you know, other than what he did practice his faith. And he
Yeah.
relapsed. He relapsed.
Hmm.
And it's something we'll talk about in the next podcast about recovery. But,
Yeah.
you know, you can know an awful lot and not know what the hell's going on inside you, what's going to lead you down a road you don't want to be down. You know,
Yeah.
I hope he ended up okay. I hope both those guys ended up okay. But yeah, you were very, you call it luck. I call it God that you had those experience with Pastor Adams, because he was one of those people that was just humble and said what's going on. And you know, and you also had some good Sunday school teachers too, some down to earth, nice, good people.
Yeah.
You know,
Definitely. I agree with that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't a very dysfunctional church at all. It's probably one of the more healthy churches around
I
until
agree.
Pastor Adams passed away.
Yeah.
You know, and then I think the people are still okay. I'm not sure. It took a while maybe to find the right pastor, though. Sometimes it does, you know, take a
Yeah.
while to find one. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
but no matter what, folks, whether you believe or don't believe, you know, obviously I believe it gives you a much greater access to power to believe in the God that is real. But you know, there's good treatment out there and help for people whether you do or don't. You know, we'll talk about that too with recovery from alcoholism or the next podcast, you know, that we're going to, you know, show up with. So don't lose hope. I don't care if you believe or don't believe if you're in my office. I mean, do I care? I mean, I care, but it's not about me. It's about what you believe, and you help the person no matter where they're coming from. You know, and respect what they do believe or don't believe. And that's real important for therapists, because therapists have influence, and certainly we have our backgrounds and our belief systems, but we're not there to impose our belief systems on you. We're there to help you
Yeah.
accomplish the goals you bring to us to help you accomplish. So you know
Yeah.
that. And I think too
Yeah.
many times today, I will go off on a little tangent, or too many times today people try and impose their beliefs on people. And that's not helpful. That's just self-centered. And that's not what
Yeah.
mental health treatment's really supposed to be about.
Right.
So just be aware. If somebody tries to do that with you, say something. And if they don't change, leave. Find someone else that will respect what you believe. For
Yeah.
sure. Right?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Encouragement for Living Life. We hope you were encouraged by today's discussion. If you have a question, you can email us at lockwoodwithlockwood@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it on one of our shows. Hope to see you next time.